Internets, by this point, you know the drill. We're in part 6 of the road to victory for every Big Brother winner. And of course, if you haven't seen the past 5 parts, check them out. There's a lot to talk about, and they're quite a spectacle. As far as word count goes, part 5 was pretty much the longest video I've ever written up to this point. But regardless, that is in the past. Let's jump right in with the next champ from Big Brother 17. Steve Moses entered the house as a 22-year-old college student who was a big fan of the game and had ardently studied about the past 10 seasons or so in preparation for his potentially 1-week stint on Big Brother 17. Steve was worried that he would be compared to the previous winner from a few years ago, Ian, on Big Brother 14. Another young college student who fit the superfan archetype. But Steve was cut from a different cloth. Steve was really good at 3 major things. First, leaning into his emotions to downplay how threatening he was to the rest of the cast. Second, being flexible with his strategy, willing to work with anyone. And third, following nearly the exact same trajectory as Ian from Big Brother 14. No joke, Steve was on the outs in week 1 and not included in the majority alliance. A big alliance called the High Rollers formed with 9 of the 16 players in it, and Steve was towards the bottom of their pecking order. On top of that, Battle of the Block returned as a twist, and 4 people were nominated each week, meaning Steve was likely in trouble early. 2 of the High Rollers won the HOH in week 1, and Steve was nominated for eviction in the first few days. And being a superfan, Steve also knew this might mean that he couldn't win the season even if he survived, because no one in the history of the show up to this point had ever survived being nominated in week 1 and won the game. But curses are meant to be broken. You see, Steve was low-key fairly good at competitions when he wanted to be. And because he was nominated and didn't have strong bonds with anyone in week 1, he took a different route. He won the first veto of the season and secured his safety going into week 2. That said, another outsider, Jace, was nominated in his place, and Steve was guilt-tripped into trying to get Jace to stay over Jackie. Steve was looked down upon by several of his fellow housemates, and he would lean into this perception time and again to allow them to underestimate him. Steve did initially connect with another outsider, John, known as Johnny Mac, the rockstar dentist, and together the two of them formed a secret alliance called the Rockstars. However, Johnny Mac was also close to Becky, and Becky didn't see the value in Steve, given Steve had no connections to anyone else, leading her to encourage Johnny to distance himself from Steve. Steve took note of this and would begin to lay out one of the longest one-sided rivalries in BB history. Becky had no idea what was about to hit her. Week 2 came around, and Steve was once again nominated on the block, this time by Becky herself. Alright, Becky, at this point, it's just personal. Although Johnny Mac was also nominated and not looking great for the Rockstars, however, they weren't put up next to each other, and in fact, J-Mac was in on a plan to throw the Battle of the Block to get Davon out of the game. Steve would win the Battle of the Block comp, meaning he was now safe yet again for another week via a comp win. Not exactly the route Steve planned to take with his game, but hey, it'll do. In the meantime, Steve also connected with another player in the game, Vanessa, and they formed a secret duo alliance called the Students of Sound because they both shared an interest in sound engineering. They were also both outsiders and needed each other in the early game as they didn't have much of anyone else to rely on. Throughout the early game, Steve was always towards the bottom of the pecking order in the house, but because of a lot of drama occurring around this majority alliance and people being rats and info getting leaked, that alliance fractured in half and the season began to break wide open. With Davon evicted in week 2, Vanessa and Austin won the third HOH and targeted the fractured High Rollers for eviction. Vanessa and Austin had also formed a secret 6-person alliance with Liz, Shelly, and Clay, which, if you're doing the math, that's actually only 5 people. And that's because there was a secret twin twist in this season where Liz had to survive 5 weeks and then her twin, Julia, would enter the game. On top of this, through his connection with Vanessa, Steve was brought into the fold with Vanessa, Austin, and Liz about Julia's existence. And then the 5 of them created another alliance called Freaks and Geeks. However, to avoid problems with copyright with the show of the same name, the producers would later have them change it, and they chose the Scamper Squad. Some of these alliance names, I tell ya. This actually became a bit of a red flag for Steve as he realized that the Freaks and Geeks Alliance was not actually being featured in the episodes because the producers never asked him about it in the diary room. And then, once the alliance began to become a serious thing, did the producers realize they had to include it in the season's storyline, at which point they started asking the alliance to find a new name. Regardless though, Steve's position was slowly improving from the first 2 weeks as he now had a group to call home, alongside his side deal with Johnny Mac and the Rockstars. The Scamper Squad was also affiliated with Shelly and Clay, ex-High Roller members, and after Jeff was evicted in week 3, did we see Shelly win HOH in week 4, and finally eliminate Audrey, a source of a lot of drama on this season. And let me tell you, there was a lot going down in these first 3 to 4 weeks, but Steve is mostly just on the outside looking in. And this is his road to victory, nobody else's. Week 5 was one of the bumpier ones for the Scamper Squad, as Vanessa won HOH and didn't really want the power, as she had made a lot of inroads with the other side of the house, known as the Goblins. Vanessa decided that she was going to backdoor Austin, another Scamper Squad member, but after Austin pleaded to her for hours to not do it, to rally with the Sixth Sense Alliance, to work with the twins, she backed down and drew a line in the sand and put up Jason, a player in the Goblins who held the most sway. Jason was evicted and the battle was on, and Steve was in the middle watching as it all went down. James, a goblin, won the next HOH and broke up the showmance that was Shelly and Clay. Clay was evicted in week 6, meanwhile Becky won the HOH in week 7 and resolved to backdoor Vanessa. Vanessa was just too strong of a player, and so to do this, she nominated both Shelly and Steve as pawns. Come on, Becky, not this stuff again. Steve, however, was not one to be trifled with, and he went on to win the veto to secure his safety yet again. As we have seen thus far, when Steve was anywhere close to being on the block, he was able to escape through his own means. Becky put up Vanessa, and yet, despite her attempts to convince the house to evict Vanessa, Vanessa got the better of her, and the house unanimously evicted Shelly instead. And then we get to that double eviction. With 10 players left in the game, Steve is a player who has yet to need to show his cards. He has just been a pawn all season, someone towards the bottom, but never big enough threat to be targeted. Steve still had the Scamper Squad alliance with Austin, Liz, Julia, and Vanessa. He also had the Students of Sound with Vanessa and the Rockstars with Johnny Mac. Not much has really changed. The other side of the house that Steve was also trying to pretend to be close to, the Goblins, was Jackie, Meg, and James, and they also had Becky with them too. It's worth noting that Steve's 2 closest allies, Vanessa and Johnny Mac, didn't get along. They wanted each other out, and it was only a matter of time. On the flip side, Johnny was close with Becky, and Steve wanted her out just as bad as he wanted Vanessa. It's important to know this because Steve accidentally wins the double eviction HOH at the final 10 and is really upset at himself for doing so. He did not want the power. He knew that he was in a good spot with just about everyone. There were so many bigger fish to fry ahead of him, and now he was increasing his targets and he had to get some blood on his hands. Steve was all about underplaying his abilities, and now he had to show his cards. He ended up nominating Jackie and Meg with a chance to backdoor Becky against Johnny Mac's wishes, but then John won the veto and that plan was out the window. Jackie was evicted and Steve sided with the Scamper Squad. He proved his loyalty and he drew them closer to him with his acting skills by being emotional, crying, and preying on their sympathy for him. Steve could have taken a shot at Austin and the twins, but he chose not to, and this proved worthwhile as Liz would win the next HOH and target Becky. Johnny Mac was a pawn, and ultimately, Becky was evicted. Steve had won the war, and then we get to week 9, the final 8, where it all hits the fan. Austin won the HOH, and you would think that this would mean Meg and James would probably be the targets. But Austin instead worked with Meg and James in an attempt to backdoor Vanessa. Vanessa was a strong strategic player who Steve had been working with all season, but he also knew for the longest time how good she was at maneuvering from player to player. She was one of the only players in the history of the show to ever escape a backdoor, and Steve knew that he could not beat her, and so Austin pitched to him and John to use John as a pawn and take a shot at Vanessa. At first, she was going to be an initial nom, but then Austin decided to use Steve as a pawn as well. Vanessa, however, was picked to play in the veto, and she proceeded to win said veto. While she wanted to use this on Steve to take him off the block and protect him, she then learned that Steve knew about Austin targeting her at the top of the week and proceeded to grill him for his double play. Steve was yet again playing both sides, and Vanessa was most hurt by Steve as she felt like he had no good reason to get her out now, whereas Austin had a reason. Vanessa tried to backdoor him back in week 5. Steve and Vanessa got into a bit of a spat, mostly just Vanessa roasting Steve, and while Vanessa actually even pushed for Steve to get evicted here while sitting next to Johnny Mac on the block, a player that she wasn't even that close to, Steve eventually apologized to her for what he'd done, being an accomplice in the plan, and reestablished his connection with her. The two forgave, but didn't forget, and John was evicted in a unanimous vote. And then it turned out there was a battle back challenge, and John won the challenge and thus was able to re-enter the game, and so all that drama was pretty much for nothing. Well, not entirely. Vanessa was the new Final 8 HOH, and right away, she took action to create her endgame. She was already working with Austin and the twins, and so Steve and Johnny Mac connected with her too to form a trio alliance. The plan was to target James and Meg and pick them off, and then directly oppose the Oz twins at the final 6. After James won the veto and the target shifted to Meg and Julia was replaced next to her, with only 3 votes needed to send either player home and James clearly voting for Julia over Meg, Steve and Johnny Mac were now in a prime spot to flip the game if they so desired. And then Steve surmised that the problem with flipping the game was that they were in a decent spot sitting behind a lot of big targets. James, Vanessa, the 3-headed Hydra that were the Oz twins, all 5 of these players were bigger targets than the Rockstars. So the Rockstars sat back and evicted Meg, leaving the Oz twins intact, and this proved to yet again be a good idea as Liz would win the next HOH in another double eviction and evict James, ending the Goblin Alliance. Had Steve decided to evict Julia instead, I don't know if that turns out the same way. Steve was now at the final 6, and it was time to make his move. He knew winning the final 6 HOH was essential to being in the best position, and that's what he did. He was clutch yet again. He nominated Austin and Liz, and after Vanessa basically misted the Oz twins into making a really dumb move, honestly one of the dumbest moves in the history of the show, to not let Julia win the veto, Austin instead won it, and Steve put up Julia next to Liz. The twins were now done for, and at the hand of Steve's HOH reign. Julia was evicted for being a smaller threat than Liz, meaning Steve could remain a smaller target behind Austin and Liz, a showmance. Vanessa won the final 5 HOH and was now caught between 2 pairs, Austin and Liz and Steve and Johnny Mac. She decided to take her chance with the showmance, not the bromance, and turned on Steve and John. However, after John won the veto, she now had to put up either Austin or Liz, and she chose Austin to hedge her bets, because maybe she would change her mind and evict Austin instead of Steve. Steve once again played up to Vanessa through the week and encouraged her to take the shot at Austin. This was the moment to split up the showmance once and for all. Johnny Mac did actually also consider evicting Steve this week just to make himself a smaller target too, but instead worked with Steve to not evict Steve, and yeah, Austin was blindsided when Vanessa flipped back to Steve's side. Steve survived the closest he had ever been to getting evicted. He almost saw his life flash before his eyes, but now he was in the final 4, and he went on to win the HOH. Regardless of who won the veto, Steve was now in the final 3. That being said, Steve did throw the final 4 veto, and I gotta say it's a pretty bad look when you consider the possibilities of final 2 combos. Steve wanted to have both John and Vanessa in the final 3 with him because he would then be guaranteed final 2. But his next best option was having John with him alongside Liz. Steve instead threw the final 4 veto to avoid getting blood on his hands, having to make the decision on who to give the vote to, and so Vanessa won the veto, and yeah, she evicted Johnny Mac. The Rockstars had played their last gig. They were done, and John wasn't the most pleased with Steve here, but he was quick to forgive. One of, if not the most impressive notches in Steve's winning game is when he was able to convince Vanessa at the final 3 that he was taking her to the final 2 if he won the final HOH. Even though Vanessa wasn't going to be taking him and neither was Liz, Steve was still able to get the mastermind of this season to believe him. Steve is often cited as Vanessa's blind spot, and while I do think that Vanessa knew where Steve was at a lot of the time, heck, I mean, she sussed him out during the week that Austin tried to backdoor her, it's still impressive to see him get her to believe that he would throw the game to her, when that was never his plan. Steve defeated Vanessa in part 3 of the final HOH and congratulated her for how accomplished of a player she was. And because of that, she had to go. Steve knew that he could not call himself a student of this game if he let her touch the final 2 seats. Steve evicted Vanessa, ending his Students of Sound Alliance after all this time from way back in the early game, and the rest was pretty easy.
Steve has said that taking Vanessa to the final 2 would be a mistake, but will he actually evict her?
Across 17 seasons of this game, I am thoroughly convinced that you are the strongest female player this game has ever seen. You always told me that I had to make the move I could justify to the superfans and to my family, and I can't justify taking the stronger player with me, which means I'm so sorry, Vanessa. I have to vote to evict you.
Had you won, would you have taken him to the final 2?
No, I wasn't going to. No.
That's
so
honest.
I can't blame him. Yeah, I wasn't going to.
Liz did have a decent final jury Q&A, and she knew that she had 2 votes locked from her showmance and her sister, and Vanessa also threw a vote Liz's way as well. But ultimately, the rest of the jury sided with Steve and crowned him the winner of Big Brother 17 with a final vote of 6-3.
Jackie's vote goes to... Congratulations, Steve! You're the winner of Big Brother!
You may remember this next face. Big Brother 18 brought back 4 players from past seasons to compete alongside 12 new players, and while the vets' collective resumes weren't nearly as impressive as the 4 vets we saw compete on season 14, I would like to think that we got an eclectic cast of characters with unfinished business. From season 17, we got James and Davon back. From season 14, we got Frank the Tank back. And from season 16, we got Nicole Franzel back. Unlike the other previous winners, Nicole entered the house stuffed into a luggage trunk. She popped out, surprised the cast, and the game was immediately afoot. Now, I think it's worth pointing out, Nicole did have ties to a few players on this season going into the game. Similar to how Janelle and Boogie had a connection on 14, or most of the cast on season 7, Nicole had met James before, and they were on good terms. And she also played with Cody on season 16, and Cody's brother Paulie was now on the cast of season 18. Nicole and Cody got along, and this connection with Paulie was an added benefit. Immediately, this cast was divided into 4 teams of 4, and the game was broken up into a team-based format for the first few weeks. Nicole was on a team with Corey, Tiffany, and Glenn, and the teams had to compete in a series of competitions to determine who would get evicted right away. Nicole's team lost, and this meant that they were subject to being the first boot. And the final comp of the premiere came down to either Corey or Glenn being eliminated, with Corey narrowly edging out Glenn to escape eviction. Nicole's game dramatically changes, likely for the worse, if Corey goes out here, given how instrumental he becomes to her game, so this was a close call. Unlike with season 14, however, Nicole was not a coach, she was a full-fledged player, and her team was now down to 3. It's also worth noting that Tiffany was the sister of season 17's Vanessa, another sibling on the cast. Nicole's team could now elect a leader, and Nicole selflessly took up the mantle for week 1, selflessly, and she became the first HOH of the summer, another major victory for her winning trajectory. I haven't talked about this too much because not many winners have done this, but in the right hands, being the first HOH can be crucial to long-term success in the game. And for a lot of other HOHs, it pretty much means their instant eviction in week 2. She immediately helped create a majority alliance called the 8-Pack, which featured the 4 returning players, as well as both members from Nicole's team, Corey and Tiffany, and then Michelle and Zakia. Within the 8-Pack, a women's alliance formed called the Fatal 5, giving them further insulation just in case the men began to act aloof. You never know. You got these brigades, you get the bomb squad, who knows what's going to happen here. Even better for Nicole, there were 3 players in the game who were causing a stir and gaining a reputation for being against the vets. Jose, Victor, and Paul had mentioned targeting them, and with Jose being the most clumsy and the loudest, I mean, he called himself the messiah of the newbies, Nicole's target was clear. She nominated Jose and had Paulie volunteer for her to go up as a pawn. Even after Paul won the veto and pulled himself off the block due to a separate twist called the roadkill where Frank won the comp and secretly nominated him, Nicole still held the numbers and Jose was the target. The 8-pack controlled the first week, and all 7 of them voted him out in a 7-4 vote, with the newbies Paul, Victor, Natalie, and Bronte on the outs. Nicole also immediately connected with her teammate Corey, and the 2 of them began a showmance. Corey was Nicole's best ally in the game, as he was a physical threat, a social threat, a comp beast, and a shield to protect her. Paulie won the second HOH, and Nicole's trajectory was going up. The plan was to backdoor Victor, and so Paul and Bronte were nominated, and after Paulie won the veto, he used it on Paul, and up and out went Victor. Nicole also aided in forming a showmance alliance this week with herself, Corey, Paulie, and Zakia. This foursome would hold a lot of power in the first half of the game, particularly in the way of Paulie, who was considered to be the frontrunner to win, up until his downfall. On the flip side, Frank's game began to tear at the seams as he made several errors, particularly with how he rubbed some of the women the wrong way, such as Devon, and how he wanted to bring Paulie into the know about the 8-pack without much collaboration from anyone else in the 8-pack. The rest of the alliance weren't too pleased with this, and because Nicole and Corey had a strong bond with Paulie, stronger than Frank did anyway, Paulie turned on Frank and grew closer to Nicole. Devon was soon brought into a 5-person alliance thanks to Paulie, and even though that alliance really didn't hold that much weight, it still further insulated Nicole into a good early game spot. Despite Frank's game deteriorating, his closest ally, Bridget, won HOH in week 3, and Frank used his connection with the 8-pack to protect Nicole. Bronte was put up via the roadkill comp alongside Tiffany and Paul, and a close vote occurred, sending Bronte home over Tiffany. Nicole, Devon, and Michelle worked together to blindside Bronte and keep Tiffany as a number for them to target Frank going forward. Nicole did also mention to Frank in an attempt to keep him in the dark that she would target Devon going forward, given that, Frank and Devon were now against each other from the prior week where Frank rubbed Day the wrong way. Frank then told this to Michelle, who relayed it to Devon, and Nicole now had to lie to Day about ever saying this. And you might think, well, why didn't she just clear the air? I think the truth is she probably would have and was sort of playing both sides. It got really messy and complicated, but ultimately most of the 8-pack agreed to make the vote a close 5-4 outcome to confuse Frank and evict a possible number for him in Bronte. Paulie then won the week 4 HOH, and this gave Frank immunity due to the team twist still in play, but the target now shifted to Tiffany, who was further on the outs after all of the alliance lines shifted. Tiffany lost a lot of social capital, was a bit of an introvert, and actually tried to align with Frank this week instead of going against him. Paulie chose to target Tiffany here, and Tiffany won the roadkill and put Corey up next to her. Nicole benefited from Corey being her shield, as even though Corey won the veto, Nicole was able to smooth talk her way out of being the replacement nom by Tiffany, and instead she put up Devon next to herself. Ultimately, it didn't really matter as Tiffany was evicted unanimously. We also then saw a tournament-style battle back occur where Victor won his way back into the house, beating all of the previous pre-jurors in competitions. An endurance HOH comp then happened where James would go on to win, a good result for Nicole given she had maintained a strong relationship with him since the beginning of the season. But on the flip side, Frank spoke with Devon in the middle of the comp and revealed Nicole did tell him that she was going to target her. This was true, she did do this, and Day now knew it. Day had a good spidey sense, she felt it coming, and she no longer could trust Nicole from here on out. Regardless, James won the HOH and targeted Frank, and the week pretty much played out rather straightforward, with Frank being evicted. Week 6 became a turning point for the mid-game of the season, where the jury was now starting and everything was about to count. Devon was now actively against Nicole, and she had Zakiya, Michelle, and Bridget on her side. That Fatal 5 alliance was looking fatal for Nicole. Paul won the HOH and didn't have enough beef with any of these key players, so he targeted Bridget with Paulie as a pawn. But after Paulie won the veto, he decided to make a major power play to convince Paul, who he was close to backdoor Devon. Nicole and Corey were also on board with this. They were okay with it, and with enough influence by Paulie, Paul made the move, and Day was evicted. This move now cemented players like Michelle and Bridget against Nicole. Meanwhile, Zakiya was somewhere in the middle, still showmancing Paulie, but it was tenuous. Victor won the next HOH and chose to work with Nicole's alliance block. She had Corey, Paulie, James, and so the noms became Michelle and Zakiya, with Michelle as the target. However, a major curveball occurred this week when James received a care package. This was a twist that allowed him to negate 2 votes at the upcoming eviction. Combining this with Paulie winning the veto and then foolishly choosing to not use it on his showmance Zakiya, who expected him to use it on her, he believed that she was a pawn and he didn't need to save her. A window of opportunity arose for James and his showmance Natalie to make a move. James would cancel 2 votes, meaning only 5 votes were being cast. And now James and Natalie just needed Bridget's vote to have the majority. The 3 of them flipped the game on its head and blindsided Nicole's side by voting out Zakiya, weakening Paulie in a move that was absolutely terrible for Nicole, Corey, and Paulie. In one fell swoop, they lost James, the influence James held with Natalie, as well as Zakiya, largely because Paulie had a huge ego. He rubbed people the wrong way, and Nicole was too loyal to Paulie to push back against him not using the veto on Zakiya. She should have done more. She should have worked over James here, but if nothing else, this would serve as a moment for Nicole to learn and adapt to the changing state of the house dynamics. Conveniently, it was a double eviction right after this, and Corey won the HOH and managed to broker peace for about 5 minutes and took a shot at Bridget, wanting to rally the former alliance block together again, the people who just turned on Nicole and Corey and Paulie. Victor and Paul had also begun to work with James and Natalie too. They wanted to be on the right side of history here, and so while, yes, Corey was HOH, they told him what he wanted to hear. Bridget got evicted. It was so quick of an HOH that it held little water going forward. Victor won the next HOH, and the gig was up. He put up both Corey and Paulie in an attempt to oust one of the 2 strongest players in the game. Nicole was now an underdog who fell backwards into a bad spot, but she did receive a care package this week granting her safety, so she was at least guaranteed to make it to the next week. Victor won the veto, didn't use it, and Paulie was doomed. Corey was still left in the game as Nicole's shield and showmance, but her numbers had rapidly vanished from being in majority to now being outnumbered 2-5. Or so it appeared. Nicole has one of the strongest endgames of any winner in Big Brother history, and this final 7 round proves why. With Paulie's foregone eviction, Nicole managed to get on better terms with Natalie in the short term and convince her that Paul and Victor were easily the biggest threats left in the game. They had won a bunch of comps, they had numbers. Nicole even managed to plant the idea that Michelle would likely work with Victor and Paul going forward after Corey and Nicole were evicted. If that's the final 5 that Natalie and James want, it is probably a losing one. Natalie won the next HOH, and after pondering it over a bit more, she targeted Paul and Victor. Likewise, Michelle won the care package twist and became a co-HOH with Natalie, which was great for Nicole as this meant neither Michelle nor Natalie could win the next HOH or vote at this eviction. Natalie managed to convince Michelle to work with her to take out Victor, and after Paul won the veto, Corey was put up as the renom, once again not Nicole, but Corey, and because James was still friends with Nicole, they were still on good terms. James was a pretty chill guy, and Nicole got along with him. The 2 of them voted to keep Corey and evict Victor. Even though Natalie actually ultimately changed her mind and wanted James to evict Corey, not Victor, she realized that she had made a mistake with her targets and trusting Nicole. But it didn't matter. James was close to Nicole and wanted Victor out. They still had that friendship from way back at the beginning of the season, and out Victor went. Which is also kind of a funny plot twist now if you know, because, well, Nicole and Victor are married. Well, hold up a minute. You can't get rid of El Fit Vic that easily. He already won a tournament beating out all of the pre-jury, and now we had another battle back competition, and Victor came back. The good news was that he was now annoyed at Natalie, as was Paul, and Nicole managed to convince James to throw her the HOH at the second Final 7 with a promise to not target him or Natalie. She was gunning for Big Meech. Michelle. Nicole won the HOH and chose to pick off Michelle, a player she was never close to, a player who greatly annoyed her, and this would mean the final 6 would be 3 duos. Nicole also pulled in Paul and Victor to form a Final 4 alliance with them after Michelle was gone. They had ample reason to gun for Natalie and James, and they believe now, after seeing Nicole not target them, that she and Corey were the more trustworthy duo in the endgame. If you realize Nicole's position now with this dynamic, the moment it was locked in that Michelle was going at the Final 7 and who was about to win the rest of the comps of the season, Nicole was basically locked for the final 2. Everyone ahead of her was a bigger target or a shield for her to utilize, and she was never in danger of going home in this endgame. It is truly impressive how well Nicole turned her game around in these 2 Final 7 rounds, given where she began walking into them after losing Paulie. Victor won the final 6 HOH and targeted Natalie and James, and Nicole and Corey pushed for Natalie to go over James, a great move for Nicole given she had way more pull with James. Corey won the veto and out Natalie went. At the final 5, Corey won the HOH, and the only way for Nicole to leave here would be for James to win the veto and turn on her, but then Nicole won the veto, so it didn't matter. Corey and Nicole obviously turned on Victor and Paul and targeted Victor a 3rd time, finally evicting him for good. An obvious move when he was the greatest comp beast of the season. Paul won the Final 4 HOH and the veto and let James cast the only vote to evict, and he was always going to take out Corey over Nicole. Corey was Nicole's shield, and he had served his purpose on a strategic level. It's also worth noting that Nicole had yet to be nominated all season, and the Final 4 was the first time she would sit on the hot seat, when nominations mattered the least. Despite being a returning player and being under fire for several weeks, Nicole's strong position kept her out of harm's way again and again, and even now at the Final 4, she was still not going anywhere. That being said, Nicole's biggest weakness was also her loyalty to her closest allies, and it needs to be mentioned that Nicole did want to take Corey to the Final 2 had she got her way, and try to beat him there. I don't think she does, and that would have been a tragic flaw had she got her way, but hey, such is life. Nicole made a deal with Paul and pushed the idea that James was the biggest threat to win the game, despite him likely being the least threatening. James, meanwhile, wanted to take Nicole to the Final 2, which meant she was now locked for the Final 2 regardless of who won. But Paul won the final HOH, took Nicole, and here we are, the Final 2. The jury Q&A was fairly equal between Paul and Nicole, as both players had locked votes regardless of what they said. Corey and Paulie were on one side, Victor and Michelle on the other, and unexpectedly, James also voted for Paul over Nicole, as did Bridget, meaning Nicole needed to get everyone else in order to win. And she managed to secure Natalie's vote, likely due to the feud between Paul and Natalie toward the end of her game. Zakia liked Nicole enough, and Davon, well, this was the toughest sell.
Hey guys, snake joke. First off, I want to say I am just so happy to be here. I'm a super fan sitting Final 2. Can't believe it. Been watching the show since I've been 8. I made an alliance with Corey 2 hours after annoying him, Final 2. We worked all the way up to day 58 without even hardly hitting a bump in the road. I had to convince Natalie to put up 2 of her own allies up on the block. I won the next HOH in the veto, made an alliance with the 2 strongest guys in the house, Vic and Paul, as a Final 4 deal, rolled, knocked out a couple weeks. I gave it all I got, and that's all I can say. I don't know.
Thank you, Nicole.
I'm bad at speaking.
Day ultimately wanted to see a woman defeat a man for the first time in a Final 2 ever. It had never happened, and it was now in Day's hands. She ultimately chose to reward Nicole with that 5th vote over Paul, declaring Nicole the winner of Big Brother 18.
Davon's final vote decides it. Congratulations, Nicole! You are the winner of Big Brother!
And now we get to the cherry on top of this messy, goopy sundae that is this season of Big Brother 19. And wait a minute, that's not a cherry, that's a meatball. Why is there a meatball on my ice? You know what? Anyway, Josh Martinez was a loud, rambunctious, eager to play house guest who entered the BB19 house and was immediately aware of who his biggest enemy in the game would be. It would be himself. His over-the-top behavior and preference to get in people's faces was very different than how the usual winner finds success, but season 19 was a lot different than most other seasons as it featured a single returning player veteran from the previous year. That being Paul, the runner-up of Big Brother 18. Much of Josh's game flows through whatever Paul decides to do, who Paul decides to target, and it is Josh's connection to Paul that would ultimately lead him to victory. That being said, in the first week, Josh was not connected to Paul, and Josh was easily at his most paranoid. First, there was a night one eviction where Josh voted against the majority to send Christmas home, and instead Cameron went. Josh was already out of the loop in the first 24 hours. He feared that he could be an early boot given his propensity for drama, and so in the first HOH comp, Josh chose to throw his team under the bus, eliminating all of them from the comp, in order for Josh to win safety for the week. He took the golden apple and was immune from eviction. Yeah, it's a selfish move, but Josh didn't want to go first, and this guaranteed he wouldn't. Josh also targeted Megan, believing that she was against him, which seemed kind of random and out of nowhere and a bit cruel. Megan didn't have a great social game, and Josh was the first player to call her out for it. In the first week, Cody won HOH and formed a massive coalition that initially targeted Megan. But then Megan decided to quit the game after she suffered from PTSD. The next target was Alex, but then Alex won the veto and took herself down, so finally Cody settled on Paul, the returning player. Paul had proven to be a strong strategist and could be lethal, and Cody didn't vibe with them much, so the target was set. And then Paul revealed the pendant protection twist, granting whomever had its safety for the first 3 weeks of this season. So, after trying to nominate nearly half the house, Cody finally landed on Christmas and the die was cast. Paul was now staunchly against Cody for targeting him and rallied the numbers to go against his wishes by keeping Christmas and blindsiding Jillian. Josh was more than fine with this, as he was also not getting along with Cody or Jessica, Cody's showmance, and Cody was just kind of rude to Josh. Cody was distant and removed, and Jessica found Josh off-putting, and the same went for Josh towards them. Paul won the second HOH with the help of most of the cast. The target was set on Cody after this horrible week 1 HOH, and Josh was now nominated as a pawn to blindside Cody and backdoor him. Josh was never the target, but was instead a shield for Paul, because Josh didn't get along with Cody. He could be used as a decoy to fake Cody out. Paul then won the veto and took Josh off the block, nominated Cody, and Cody went. Week 3 saw Alex win the HOH and target Jessica, Cody's showmance, to finish the job of clipping the social pariahs. However, another player, Dominique, began to clock that Paul was controlling the game and a bit of a snake, and given Paul had eyes and ears and ravens everywhere with a lot of this cast, a lot of whispers, this got back to Paul and Dominique became the new target. The status quo in the house was quickly being established. You don't cross Paul, and if you do, prepare to face Judgment Day. Dominique was evicted unanimously, and suddenly the game got twisted when a battle back occurred this early, and Cody won his way back into the game. Cody and Jess were reunited and hellbent on taking out as many of these minions of Paul as possible. And after Jessica won the next HOH, she set her eyes squarely on Josh. Jessica nominated Josh next to Ramses, a player she believed to be a pawn who nobody would want out due to his unassuming, quiet nature. Everyone liked Ramses. Meanwhile, Josh was loud and in your face and ruffled feathers constantly. It seemed like a no-brainer of an eviction, but Paul began to realize exactly what needed to be done. Just like with week 1 and Cody not getting his way, the plan was now to evict Ramses, save Josh, and have Jessica not get her way either. In a vote of 7-3, with only Cody, Elena, and Mark voting to evict Josh, Ramses was blindsided and went out the door. More than that, however, Paul began to break down the house into pockets of players. There was a big coalition of players who were all rallied around getting Jessica and Cody, the lightning rod showmance, out, and Paul knew soon enough when Jess and Cody were gone, there wouldn't be a common enemy. So Paul began to form a trio of 3-person alliances across the board. First with Josh and Christmas, called the Misfits. Second with Alex and Jason, called Whistlenut and Olay, after Jason's horses. And third with Matt and Raven, and they didn't have a name, they were just the puppet masters. Likewise, Paul also strongly connected with Kevin, the older guy in the cast, and Kevin really wasn't much of a game player other than to just, listen to whatever Paul asked him to do. Kevin was loyal to Paul as much as anyone else was, and Paul was his closest ally. Of the 12 players in the game, Paul now had control of 8 of them, including Josh, and the first targets were Jess and Cody, followed by Mark and Elena. Also, probably worth noting that Mark and Elena wanted to work with Paul too, but it's a clown car, it can only fit so many bodies before someone has to fall at first. Paul would slowly vilify Mark and Elena to the rest of the house for their association with Cody and Jess, and this would lead the cast against them too in future weeks. Also, Josh did not get along with Mark that much. They fought over really petty things like pool. It was a whole debacle. And I basically have been explaining Paul's game, but this was the state of the season, and it pretty much played out exactly as described. Paul moved through everything, and everything moved through Paul, and it's also largely why Josh won. But we'll get to that in a minute. Jessica saved herself in week 5 with another twist that canceled the eviction. This set off fireworks where Josh was then deployed by Paul as his attack dog. Josh would whip out pots and pans and chant a circus theme while banging them in front of Jess and Cody. He did it to antagonize the underdogs, rattle them, annoy them, demoralize them. That said, there were times where Josh felt like he was going overboard and would eventually break down into tears after the fact. A part of him felt guilty for fighting back against the rude comments Cody would make. A part of him felt shame for acting the way he did. But ultimately, he was Josh. This was his personality. It contained multitudes. What are you going to do about it? Josh won the week 6 HOH and initially wanted to take out Elena for being sneakier and a stronger player than Cody or Jess. Josh coincidentally also didn't get along great with Elena and nominated her as the target next to Jess, but Paul then convinced Josh to switch targets to Jess by the end of the week, and Jess was finally evicted. Also, probably worth pointing out, Cody had also won a comp that gave him safety. Otherwise, Cody would have definitely been the target. Which he was following the week when Alex backdoored him. Cody was the first juror, and the two-headed showman's beast had been slain. And honestly, there aren't that many details that I need to get into. It's that simple. Cody went up and Cody was gone. All was well. Jason won the next HOH, and the seeds of Mark and Elena being next on the hit list came to fruition as Jason put them both up. Mark won the veto, so Elena was evicted. Meanwhile, Christmas won the next HOH, backdoored Mark, and now Mark was evicted too. Heading into the final 8, we now had 3 duos, which were all actually trios, as they all included Paul. And then there was Kevin, the easy house target. Josh was still strongly riding with Paul and Christmas in the Misfits alliance, and Jason was the next HOH and was supposed to take out Kevin. However, Paul recognized Matt was the biggest threat left, and together Paul, Jason, and Alex didn't have the veto get used, and instead Matt got evicted, leaving his showman's Raven in Paul's corner. Following this was one of the weirdest HOH results in BB history. Paul managed to convince every player to throw the comp until there was only Christmas left in the game. Mind you, Christmas had broken her foot back in week 1 and had to use crutches all season, and this comp was all about sprinting as fast as you can. The plan went through, and Paul managed to give Christmas an HOH win after the entire house trusted them and their machinations. Paul's plan was to have Christmas take a shot at the next strongest duo, Jason and Alex, and Paul would pretend to be in Jason and Alex's corner all week. After Paul won the veto and told Jason and Alex that it was going to be used to save Alex and Kevin would be the new target, they would then rally a third vote to keep Jason and evict Kevin. At least, that was Paul's plan to Alex and Jason, feigning loyalty to them, when in fact, the actual plan was to blindside Jason all along. Paul instructed Josh to vote out Jason alongside Raven, who was getting revenge against Jason for evicting Matt in a previous week. Paul would then vote out Kevin with Alex, forcing a 2-2 tie, making Christmas break the tie against Jason. Paul could then play up to Alex going forward how they got screwed. It's now Paul and Alex versus the world. Jason got done dirty by Josh. Josh was the patsy for Paul's plan, and Josh realized this. Josh didn't like it. Josh talked to Christmas about this in private, how he was wary of Paul and how this all looked bad for Josh and great for Paul. Paul had so many allies, so many exit plans no matter who won power. Meanwhile, Josh looked like the fool who was going against his word to evict Kevin. Jason would be pissed off at him. Christmas reassured Josh to just stick to the plan, and Josh even talked to Paul about this too, feigning his growing mistrust of Paul. Josh was becoming aware that Paul was the frontrunner to win and needed to be dealt with sooner than later. And Josh began to undermine Paul's plans in a way that Paul couldn't anticipate in the goodbye messages, where Paul was lying to Jason about what happened with the vote. Josh, in turn, would tell Jason the truth.
Paul came up with an elaborate plan in order to get you out. And I've been in a final 3 alliance with Christmas and Paul for a while now.
Jason, if you're seeing this right now, you left me with a bunch of counterfeits.
I think that everybody thinks about friendship, and Paul is now obsolete. Now he can take his bracelets and pitch them.
Take a deep breath.
I'd like to just run straight for like a really long time.
Paul's brand was loyalty. It was friendship. You can't peddle friendship and lie to the jurors' faces once they've already left the house. What's even the point at that point? Unless, you just couldn't face the music. Alex would go on to win the next HOH, and because she believed Paul was her only ally, she followed Paul's suggestion to not target Josh, but instead gun for Raven. Kevin and Raven were nominated in the double. Josh won the veto, guaranteeing no funny business, and after he didn't use it, this meant the 3 misfits controlled the votes at the final 6. Josh voted to evict Kevin to go with Alex, but Paul and Christmas evicted Raven instead, and out Raven went. And Paul smoothed things over with Alex because, hey, Raven was clearly a mastermind pulling the strings and needed to go. Josh then won the final 5 HOH, and this was a big moment for his game. He strongly debated with himself about if he should finally take a shot at Paul. He nominated the easy targets in Alex and Kevin and was planning to wait until the veto was decided to determine his next move. And then Paul won the veto. Well, that settles it. Paul had to sit Alex down and explain to her why he wasn't going to save her with the veto, despite appearing to work together. He cited her being too big of a threat. Paul lost against Nicole on season 18. He viewed Alex sort of like another Nicole. He couldn't take her any further and repeat his mistakes. Oh, the irony. Alex was pretty upset and disappointed in Paul, and even then, Paul still cast a vote against Kevin to tie it up, to split yet another vote under the guise of friendship, but it was blatantly hollow this time for Alex as she knew what the deal was. Paul wasn't her friend. Paul was shady, and Paul couldn't own up to it well enough to win her back. Paul won the final 4 HOH and veto and let Christmas cast the vote against Kevin. The Misfits alliance was never in doubt, and while Josh did want to take out Paul for a few weeks now, his window of opportunity never materialized due to Paul's comp prowess. Josh was now in the final 3 and had a bit of a revelation for who he would take with him to the final 2 if he got the chance. He wanted to take Paul. He recognized that Christmas was a lot more passive than Paul, but Paul had burned so many people along the way to get to this point, it might earn Josh some votes. Paul might have more enemies in the jury for his betrayals, whereas Josh was a known antagonist who wore it on his sleeve. Kind of sounds a little bit like Dr. Will for a minute, doesn't it? Which is a wild comparison. Christmas wanted to take Paul to the end, but Paul also viewed Josh as a shield, as a goat to be taken and slaughtered at the end. After Paul and Josh won parts 1 and 2, it was over. That was the final 2. Josh won part 3, the final HOH, and evicted Christmas. And heck, even Christmas was telling Josh to do that. She really liked Paul. But the moment of reckoning was upon us. The jury Q&A happened, and Josh did okay. It wasn't the best nor the worst. He stumbled, but he also explained his loudmouth ways well enough to stay in contention. The real spotlight was on Paul, as was much of this recounting of Josh's road to victory. Paul had to atone for his sins committed to get here, for going back on the friendship brand and bracelet they dangled in front of everyone all season. In particular, Jason and Alex stewed in the jury house as Paul lied and lied. And even in the jury Q&A, continued to not own the two-faced nature of their strategy. Jason and Alex were frustrated with Paul's inability to be fully honest. And then you had Mark and Elena and Cody over there all despising Paul for how everything went down halfway into the game. Guess who orchestrated all of their evictions? And yeah, the votes votes came in 4-4. Cody was the final vote, and he gave it to Josh. As he said so himself, Josh was scum, but at least he was open about it. He took action. Paul slithered behind closed doors, and Cody thought he was a coward and not worthy of his vote. In the most backwards way possible, Josh defeated Paul in a final vote of 5-4, another 5-4 loss for Paul in back-to-back seasons, where Josh entered the house as a panicked, paranoid goober who was his own worst enemy. He left it having used that reputation to his advantage, as well as having had it taken advantage of by a mastermind like Paul. Make no mistake, Josh did not control a lot, but he did often control himself, for better and worse, and that contrasted strongly next to Paul, who left a lot of the jurors confused about how to feel. Not every road to victory takes the same path. Heck, as we've seen, a lot of them differ, and in this meatball's case, Josh's might have been the most unique of them all.
Congratulations, Josh. You are the winner of Big Brother.
And that's it. That is part 6 of the road to victory for every Big Brother winner. It's in the books, another 3 winners down, and I want to know now, what do you think about this trio of champs? Should Paul be in the conversation? Did Nicole deserve it? Were you rooting for Vanessa over Steve? A big thank you to my patrons for all your support. Thank you all for watching. I hope you enjoyed the video. Don't forget to grab that golden apple on your way out, and I will see you in part 7 once I leave a nice, long, sincere voicemail of a goodbye message. Remember, friendship.
As a human being, I've always been conflicted. I think that life is meaningless and important at the same time. It's meaningless because we're all gonna die, but it's important because we're living, we can love. So why are you guys on the block? You're victims just like I am. But unfortunately in life, victims aren't we all. That's all I have to say.
I'm really sorry, but I came here to play a game, and it's a game decision. I'm sorry. Austin, I vote to evict you.
Good luck, Austin.
I told myself that I would come in here and be emotionless. Tried to play this game as best as I could, and I feel like it brought out the worst sides of me.
I hate seeing butterflies. So that thing better not come near me and try and land on me.
Damn butterfly flies by.
You're literally on the block because of something I said?
Because of you. So how am I a liar and how am I a manipulator? Because that's what you told them.
I didn't know that I was the reason you're on the block.
Oh, you knew that I was the reason I was on the block. Because you were gonna save you and Corey's ass by making something up about me.
Hey everyone, my Patriot punishment's done! Woohoo! Yeah! I'm getting
Apparently
full
you're on
nude.
the block because of me, because of things that I've said.
Who have I manipulated? Because I'm on the block right now because of you.
Oh, are y'all fighting?
You did absolutely nothing.
Yeah, that worked for me.
And you're proud of that. That's pathetic, Matt.
Mark, guess what? You hit the jury house way before I did.
I never said I was a great player.
Super fan. Yeah, okay, dude. Sit down.
I am sitting down, Matt.
I haven't heard directly from her, so I haven't really given him a fair shot.
All that I'm saying is that
it's like
it's just
it's a weird situation.
You definitely want to
Like I would walk up to her right now and hug her.